What are they good for? Okay, bush camping tools here. I'm going to tell you now what I think, what they're good for. But first, a cup of coffee. All of these blades here are great for hunting and camping, and the reason is because they're basically a drop point in design, almost a drop point in design. Can be argued, but they also have a relatively good belly. This one has the most pronounced belly on here, so this will be good for skinning. You could skin with all of these. The tips are not too pointy. You're hardly likely, unless you're extremely clumsy, to pierce the hide. This one's a bit more pointy here. You could go hunting with this for sure. It's not particularly a skinning knife. They're not very big. There's my hand there as a size scale. They're all pretty sturdy. In fact, they're more than sturdy enough for camping, hiking, and hunting. This one's pretty weighty. Essentially, so they have some different grinds here. These are bevel ground. So is this one. This one here is a convex grind on here, and this one's a convex grind. This is a straight bevel on here. So what does that mean? That means slightly different sharpening techniques are required. So if you don't think you're capable of sharpening some convex edge like in these two here, then I would go for something that had a straight bevel edge. Now this is a whole range of different from different manufacturers. These knives, we've got Work Tough Gear, Extrema Ratio, Kiesler Supreme, Benchmade, Ator, and Dirk Wagner or Linda knives, the new edition of the Linda knives there. Notice they all have the capacity to place a lanyard in them. This is really, really important, I feel, for an outdoors knife, to be able to place a lanyard, because there may be at times when you don't want to lose that knife, and it's really important that you can have it securely attached to you or to something else, so you don't drop it. That may be dropping it in a fast-flowing river or a very deep section of the river or the ocean, the sea, coastal region. Could be down just a crack in the ground that you'll not be able to retrieve that knife. So it's important to have, for an outdoors knife, a lanyard hole on there, and they all satisfy that. The grips you see there, different kinds of grips. We've got synthetic grips here, synthetic grip and a wooden grip. The slight advantage of a wooden grip is possibly that you may not find one of these types of grips will satisfy your hand 100%, but with a wooden grip it can always, if it's big enough to begin with, you could always reshape it to fit your hand precisely. However, wooden grips will require more aftercare, so if you're pretty sloppy and you don't look after your tools very well, maybe a wooden grip's not so good for you. But these synthetic grips here and here, these are very sturdy. They're good against ultraviolet, water, all sorts of things, and they provide a sturdy grip. You can see there's different shapes and sizes. So the ergonomics, it really depends on, you know, the individual's hand. I always say try before you buy. In the days of the internet today, it's quite difficult. Maybe you can't get near a shop to actually try one to see how comfortable it is, but that's always my advice. Try it before you buy it. You may look really funky on an internet page, but the grip you might find is incredibly uncomfortable or it just doesn't suit you. Okay, let's talk briefly about steel type. Does it really matter what kind of steel type it is for an outdoors knife? Not particularly. It really depends on how well or how poorly you treat your tools. For example, this is a stainless steel N690. This is Sleipner steel. This is a tool steel. It's not designated as a stainless. This nor is designated as a stainless. This is K329. This is 3V. This is a stainless here, Ator's proprietary, and this is ATS 34, sort of a stainless as well. However, all stainless steels will rust, knife steels that is, if given the right conditions. And so it's important to look after your knives in the wild. Now, knives with injection molded handles such as this one here, this Benchmade and this Linda, these are pretty maintenance free. Because there are no scales for anything to get underneath of. Of course, if you leave them in the water long enough, water can get in through here, through the handle, and here, between the tang and the handle itself. These scales, as you see, cannot come off. These ones can be removed, these ones can be removed, and these ones can be removed. So if the knives get immersed in liquid, especially salty water, doesn't have to be, or dirty fresh water, or fast flowing fresh water, because it has lots of oxygen in there, that can cause corrosion in the handle. If you don't look after your tools, they are going to wear out a lot quicker. So yeah, stainless steels, semi-stainless if you like, with 8% chrome in them, such as these, they're all good. What about hardness? Well, everyone's getting hung up on having the hardest possible knife steels they can have, above 60 Rockwell. Well, that's all good and well. It's great because you don't have to kind of sharpen your knives all the time. However, if you do let your knives go blunt, you will find that it is very difficult to sharpen them. Anything above 58 is going to get really difficult. 55 is easy enough, and to be honest, sometimes that's more than good enough. But when it gets above 60, 61, 62, in some cases even 63, you'll find it very difficult and time-consuming to sharpen, especially if you don't have the right sharpening tools with you at hand. So that's another thing to consider. How about these knives? What are these knives good for? Let's take a look. Well, we have a range of blade types here, but I'm going to start with this one here. This one is obviously quite a large, hefty drop point blade. Okay, drop point, no need for any explanations there. A classic blade. Let's put that down there. This also has a drop point. Okay, albeit a bit smaller. Okay. This one here is really a tool. This doesn't satisfy any of the regular kind of blade shapes. It is sort of like a blunt-ended tanto type design, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Just put this to the side. This is like a classic clip point blade, almost. We have a type of tanto here again, slight tanto-esque type blade. Here's another one with a much more pronounced tip. You can see that there. Yet another type tanto blade. You can tell I like the tanto type blades, not so pronounced as the other one. And this one here is what people are calling, a tracker type blade. I originally called this a type of a recurve because the blade recurves in here. It's not flat. Well, the drop point is the quintessential blade shape, which maybe most people equate with outdoor usage. It's possible to use a drop point to skim with, of course. This is a rather large drop point. I wouldn't take this as a hunting knife because it's too heavy, but yes, you could if you had to, because it's got a nice belly towards the tip there. However, it's a very, very heavy knife, and when you're skinning, you're doing a lot of this with the wrist action, and you're going to get worn out pretty quickly. Hence, it's better to take a smaller drop point if you want to go hunting with. But such a knife, yeah, you can chop down logs such as this with this, chop up tree trunks, all sorts of things. This is a super heavy duty knife. If that's the kind of knife you're looking for some serious wilderness action, then yeah, sure, a drop point, you can't really go wrong with it. And because basically the main part of the blade is straight here, it's pretty good for food preparation. The type of food that you prepare, however, will depend upon the thickness of the blade behind the edge. If it's way too thick, it's just going to make a mash of the food. So in other words, for slicing, you don't want too thick a blade. This is more of a chopper and a cutter. Can you process fish with it? Well, yeah, it's got a relatively okay tip on there for gutting. Not necessarily the best for processing fish. And as you know, or probably don't know, fish knives are specific shape. They're very skinny and pointy, and there's a reason for that, because they're better at gutting fish. Here now is another classic blade shape, the clip point blade, often associated with military style blades. These types of shaped blades make good outdoor knives, I believe. They've got a good point, they can gut fish very well. Most of the blade is straight here, they're not too thick, usually clip points behind the edge, and so they're good for preparing food with, and it's got a good point on there, as I said, and that's important there for an outdoors knife in general. These blades have what we know as a Western style tanto shape, and that is a straight edge here and a straight edge there, quite pronounced in this case here, with a very pointed tip. This tip is less pointed, but it's thicker around the tip. Both of these knives are intended for military use, although they're quite strong in the tip, so as to take quite a lot of abuse. If you start abusing a knife tip, you're going to break it. They're easy knives to maintain in the field, whether that's for outdoor use or military use, because it's just one straight edge here and there, one there and one there, so no fancy sharpening skills. Tantos, because they've got quite good tips, usually they're good for gutting fish. They're absolutely useless for hunting purposes because you can't skim with them. They're too pointy here, and the straight edge does not yield to the right ergonomics for removing hides. You could, of course, put your game, but you won't be able to take the hide with them. You could in a pinch, but it's not the right knife for that kind of work. Believe it or not, tantos make great knives for carving. Absolutely, because they look like a chisel. Not too much imagination, you can see this looks like a chisel tip, just like a regular wood carving chisel, so they're great for carving with. They make good carving knives. Here's another tanto style blade, however this one towards the tip is not straight, it's somewhat curved. This one is possibly a bit more versatile than these. Maybe you could use this for skinning in a pinch. Again, it would be extremely uncomfortable because of the size, the length of the knife blade and the weight of it, but nonetheless this you could do some form of hunting with this one. For food preparation, again, it depends upon how thick the blade is. If the blade is too thick behind the edge, it's not going to be the best for food preparation. This one here, I've taken it out many times. It's not too thick behind the edge for food preparation. Has some partial serrations there too for quick cutting of ropes and cords. Yeah, so with the straight edge, like all of these other things here too, not too bad for food preparation. And that's important because if you're going out hiking, camping, all sorts of stuff in the wilderness, at some point you've got to feed yourself. Okay, you could just go out for the day and do nothing more than eat sandwiches that you've taken with you, that's fine, but then you don't need to carry a really big knife like this with you because you're probably going to be on some known trails. But if you're going into pure wilderness, you do need to feed yourself. That is important. Alright, finally let me talk about this kind of blade shape because this is different from everything else which I've shown here. This, as I've already said, is like a recurved type blade, or they're calling it a tracker style blade. So you've got this curved edge here and a pronounced belly here. Kind of applications is this kind of blade design suitable for? Well, this recurve section here actually excels in cutting fibrous materials. This, if you like, is like one giant serration, only one serration. So for example, if you had to cut a lot of grass to make some bedding, this would be a great knife for that, because as you grab a hold of the grass is all moving. It's not one solid like stick or anything, and this shaped blade, this recurve in here, is excellent for cutting grass and fibrous material. You could make bedding with it. You could use it for some kind of shelter. If you haven't seen the movie Tesuasala, I totally recommend watching that movie. That is a great survival movie. Okay, so cutting fibrous material. The tip here, because it's quite pronounced on here, this has a good belly. You could use this definitely to skin with. You can also gut fish with this because this has a point, a good point. So you've got this great belly, and this is good here for skinning. You've got this for fibrous material, this for gutting fish. However, this knife also requires quite a bit of sharpening skill because you've got two very different sections of blade shape here. They require different skills, different techniques to keep a blade like this sharp, especially in the wilderness, you know, where you may not have heaps and heaps of time or the comfort of things around the home to keep that knife sharp. This type of blade shape is not necessarily good for, and that is food preparation, because you can't slice anything with this, because if you try to slice something with that, you can see this gap underneath of here. Well, this gap, you won't be cutting anything, will you? There's only this part of the blade up here which is in contact with something laying flat to chop something, and that's it. So it's not a good knife for slicing up food, for food preparation. Not this type of blade anyway. I don't mean the knife, but this type of blade is not the best for that. You want something like this. This is better for food preparation because you've got a longer, flatter part of the blade. If we look at this knife here, if I put this down on here, you can see that that's in contact with the surface there, okay, for cutting up food. So finally, that brings me to this knife here, or rather, as I introduced it to begin with, as a tool. This is quite a different kind of knife. As such, it's quite heavy, it's quite thick. It does have a slightly curved belly here and a slightly curved tip, almost blunt looking, but it is somewhat tanto-ish in shape. So what is this knife? This is somewhat of a heavy duty survival type tool, whilst it doesn't have a super sharp tip. It is sharpened right up to the tip there. I hope you can see that there. Relatively easy to keep sharp because it's, you know, fairly straight here, nothing too fancy on that. It's quite a hefty blade. You can hammer things in with this thing. You can use it to chop down trees because of the handle length. You see the handle length is quite long compared to, let's just compare it to another even bigger knife there. There's a big knife and you see the handle is much longer there. Yes, I would call this a tool as opposed to a knife. It's not something I would take on a day hike. It's something I would take on an extended camping trip into the wilderness. This, you can depend on, you're not going to break it. It's like a small hatchet, okay? So this is getting a crossover between a knife and a tool. This for me has specialist applications for survival type use, extreme use, due to the robust nature of the blade. Now, of course, you can say that about many knives, and if you're careful, you could survive with any knife whatsoever. This thing has something you could shove into things. You're not going to damage the tip on this because it's so thick. You just get a load of that tip there. It's not possible to break such a tip. Well, hopefully I've given you an insight into the functionality of different blade shapes. There is no one knife that can do everything, outdoors wise, for sure. And without a doubt, blade shape will dictate what you can and can't do with that knife in the outdoors. and how easy it will be for you to sharpen and or maintain that knife in the outdoors. What knife you choose to purchase will, of course, be dependent on the kind of activities you like doing. If you like hiking, you may choose a smaller type knife. If you like wandering off into the wilderness, you might choose larger knives such as these. One final point I'd like to make about all the knives I've spoken about today is, and that is, what you can do with a knife really depends on the skill of the user. Okay, so even with such a blade that looks like you can't do much with here, the skill of the user, you can do a lot with it.